Hi, I'm Marie from Minneapolis, and you're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics.
I am Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and my second broad today is Molly Jong-Fast, who is a novelist, a writer, a feminist, and most importantly is one of the most fun people to follow on Twitter. So, hi, Molly.
Thank you. Hi, how are you?
I've actually decided that I'm going to just stop reading the news and just read it all filtered through your Twitter feed.
Oh, thank you. It's a lot of news all the time, so yeah. It's a lot.
It really, really is, and it's a lot to sort of, you know, it's hard to remember like what you read 2 days ago. There'll be some terrible story about, you know, somebody getting away with something, and then you're like, oh, right, that must have happened years ago, and it's like, no, it was this morning.
It's amazing. Bizarre. It's true. There was a period right before the election where I felt like it got quiet. And there were a couple, there was one or two matters where it was like she clearly didn't have quite enough to fill all the time. And I was like, wow. But then it went back to its usual breakneck.
Yeah, I think that's just because Mueller wasn't doing anything right before the election.
Yeah. No, that's what I think it was. Yeah, because he had to wait. Or he wanted to wait.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we're recording, this is on Thursday. You won't be hearing this till Friday. But as we're recording, the news just broke that Alderman Ed Burke's office was raided in Chicago.
Chicago, yeah.
I live in Chicago, and this is,
lawyer.
Yes, I'm super excited about this news because the only thing better than the Trump empire collapsing is the Trump empire collapsing and taking the Chicago machine with it.
What are they? The Chicago machine? Explain.
Yes, so Alderman Ed Burke has been the alderman for longer than I have been alive, by several years, I think. So you and I are around the same age, 40.
Yeah.
And he's been alderman for something like 46 years or something. His wife is on the Illinois Supreme Court, which seems like a bit of a conflict of interest at times. He makes $120,000 a year as an alderman and also works as an attorney, apparently, even though it's meant to be a full-time job. I believe like his brother-in-law is a state representative. I don't know, the whole family. It's just like the machiniest
really
of machine politics in Chicago.
Yeah.
So...
All right, so tell me, and then there's that, and then also Michael Cohen has sort of fixed up his plea deal.
Yes. So hopefully this all means that very soon people will, you know, start to get arrested, like Trump Jr.
That's the hope anyway. We're all waiting for Trump Jr. and for Roger Stone and for, Jared, supposedly, though, who knows, you know.
It is my 10-year wedding anniversary today, and I want nothing more than for one of these things to happen. That would be the best anniversary gift ever.
True.
Clearly not much of a romantic, but...
it is romantic.
So you've been writing a bunch of pieces in Forward, or is it The Forward? Forward?
Yeah, The Forward, yeah.
On the Forward, and you wrote one recently called How Trump Turned a Horde of Yoga Moms Like Me into Radicals. So it was right just after the election, a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about that some with you. I mean, it's kind of been the theme of this whole podcast. We've been going a little over a year, and, you know, that's a common refrain. You know, I think I was always a radical at heart, but I certainly wasn't an active radical prior to November 2016. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what that journey was like for you.
You know, I came from a family of radicals. My grandfather was Howard Fast, who wrote Spartacus and who was jailed for not naming names during the House on Un-American Activities. And then my mother was a sort of feminist, second-wave feminist radical. So in some ways, I always thought I would be kind of more woke than I was. You know, I got married. I got sober when I was a teenager. I got married very young. I was like not that woke. And it was kind of interviewers were always interested in it, and people would always be a bit surprised that I wasn't more galvanized one way or the other. I mean, I was definitely a Democrat, but I was like one of those like flabby, lazy New York Democrats who always sort of, it's a blue state, so it'll be fine. I wasn't particularly interested one way or the other, and I had all these children, and I was sort of distracted. And then when Trump got nominated, I was like, well, I was like, this man, it's funny because I remember it as he'll never be president, and everyone telling me he'd never be president, and me thinking, okay, he'll never be president. But I was recently with a friend of mine who said, you kept saying to me he's going to be president, and and I said, really? I thought but so I guess I did think on some level that he was going to become president. I was still shocked the day. But when he got nominated, I thought I have to do everything I possibly can to keep this lunatic from being president, because not even because he's so incompetent and racist and dumb and just horrendous in every way, but also because I have a daughter, and I just felt that having a daughter, I have sons too, but having a daughter and then having a president who's clearly a sexual deviant on some level be elected in spite of his sexual deviancy, I just couldn't, I don't know why I couldn't square that for her. Like, I just couldn't. And so I became more involved in donating money and canvassing and doing some stuff for Hillary. But by then it was almost too late in a way, because I was the sort of, the die had been cast, and I also didn't quite know how to get involved, really, because it's not that easy to get involved it was not that easy to get involved with Hillary's campaign for whatever reason. So I did some things, but not as much as I wanted to. And then when he won that day, I was like so completely shook. And I think some of it was, I had grown up with a fair amount of privilege. So the idea of having something happen, I had never been disenfranchised. I had grown up very privileged. I had always sort of had what I needed or wanted, and things never happened to me that seemed so outside of the norm. I wanted to go to a certain college. I didn't get in, but I got in somewhere good. It wasn't like, it had never been that I had known what was right and then what was right had not happened. Like, that had never happened. And it was so clear to me that what was wrong had happened, like that and that this was going to be an absolute disaster. So I immediately was like, I cried every day for a month, literally every morning. And I'm like not a person who cries. I just don't relate to it. But I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I just couldn't accept it. And so what happened was eventually I said to my husband, what can we do here? What can we do? We have to do everything we can now. And that's where we started I started getting involved in, I'm now on the board of a Democratic organization, and I raise money for candidates, and I write this political stuff. And we have these summits where we train people to run for office. And we had all these really good candidates who won, including Lauren Underwood. I mean, just really great candidates. So that's how I got into it. But, I had not, it's funny because climate had always been a big issue for me, but I had never been so, I don't know why. I had thought things would sort of work out without me, that I wasn't necessary. I really did. I thought I wasn't so necessary for this. And that, I would write my books and whatever, my satirical novels that no one read. And I wouldn't, and that I wasn't so needed. And when this happened, I became so convinced that there was no one who was ever going to do that. We just all had to just absolutely do everything we could possibly do, and that there was no one who was coming to rescue us. And so that was how I got more involved in politics. And I think that when Trump's gone, I'll still be, because I just have so little faith now in the checks and balances that were supposed to keep us safe,
So I think, too, that I will, continue to be involved. I guess one of the things I've been thinking about is how we make sure our kids stay involved, so you were raised by a feminist hippie. My mom's perhaps less counterculture, but still,
right.
She used to say she didn't burn her bras in college, she just didn't wear them. But but our moms were activists, and yet when it came to us being adults, I think I had a lot of the same, like, it'll just all happen without me. Obama got elected without me. It'll be fine.
Exactly.
So how do we make sure that we raise our kids to not do that same thing as they become adults?
Well, I think we're the same age and we're 40, and some of what happened to us is this weird thing of we grew up in a lot of prosperity and not a lot of political. Like, we had bad presidents, Reagan, Bush 2, Bush 1, but we also had, many years of Clinton and many years, we had a lot of, even our bad presidents weren't so bad. They weren't great. I'm not saying they were good, don't get me wrong, but, they weren't Nixon. So Nixon was actually probably arguably a little bit better than Bush 1 or Bush 2, but I'm just saying, or Reagan actually. But either way, they weren't, what we have with Trump is like a completely different thing, right? It's like a president like we've never seen. So I think some ways our kids will be more activated from having grown up through that, hopefully. The problem with our kids is they're going to inherit this incredibly fucked up climate changed world. And I don't even know that we can guess what it's going to be like for them. Like, it may be that they are, there's a good possibility that they're, it's like Mad Max and the Thunderdome by the time they're. So it may not be a question of being an activist. It may be a question of, like, who has the water, I hope it's not, but it's certainly possible. So that's why I'm more concerned with, like, getting American democracy back, trying to, get, the EPA back together, get all of the different things he's ruined, back together if we can, and to try to get going on climate change, because that stuff is going to be, we weren't prepared for it under Obama. We're really now, 4 years later, or, right now it's 2 years later, but we're going to be so screwed. You already see it with the, the rain and the fires so I think is going to be, I think these kids are going to be so mad at us, for the many ways in which we let them down,
Yeah, my 4-year-old knows just enough to know that climate change is a problem, and he keeps walking around being like, "We need to fix climate change." I'm like, "Well, you're right, honey." But I think climate change is the thing that even now that we're starting to see it, it's hard to know, like, what do I as an individual do? What can I do? What should I do? And whereas
there are like 8 companies that are responsible for 80% of the climate problems. They're like Exxon is responsible for 30% of all the climate emissions. It doesn't necessarily matter so much certainly there are things we can do, and, don't fly in a private plane, but more than that, it's really pressuring the government to do things like carbon credits and taxes, and to make polluting too expensive for them to do it is really going to be the way we get anything done. It's not so much about us. It's funny because my husband lived in California during the big drought, and, they would say, like, don't, take a bath, don't take a shower. They'd have all these little ways to save water. And the reality was industrial companies were using 80% of the water anyway. It didn't really matter if you took a shower or not. So, which is not to say that there aren't things we can do, but just to say, if you're not composting, you don't have to necessarily feel too terrible, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I miss a government where we debated how to fix problems instead of whether we should fix problems. And maybe I'm missing a government that has never existed in my lifetime. That's entirely possible.
No,
but
I don't think that's true. I mean, I think under Obama, the problem with Obama, I always think, and I really loved Obama, and a lot of his people from his White House work at our advisors to our super PAC and to the arena. But the thing that I think is he was so by the book and worried about, doing anything in a partisan way. He's basically the opposite of Trump, that he was constantly, holding himself back from doing things he probably could have done and should have done. But I think ultimately his goal was to fix problems for people. Whereas, as you can see with Trump, that's not. His goal is just to make money and play golf.
Yeah.
Which is sort of fascinating. I mean, it is sort of amazing to have this president that's so diametrically opposed to everything I stand for values-wise. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So speaking of values, you also wrote a piece recently about the second trimester abortion that you didn't want and didn't have. That's been misread by a number of people.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting about that because I wrote this piece back when I had my teenage son. I had him when I was 24, and I actually really wanted him. And I didn't want to have an abortion, but I was very young. But it turned out we had this weird Jewish genetic disease that actually meant there was a 25% chance we were going to have, he was going to die, that he had this terrible disease. And it ended up being fine. But, I had to wait like a week or 2 weeks to find out the test results on it. And I was really surprised when my doctor said she couldn't, if I needed an abortion, she couldn't perform it because it was a second trimester abortion, even though it was 12 and a half weeks or something, that's a totally different thing, or 13 weeks. So I talked about why I think it's important that we keep second trimester abortions around, and that people, if they need them, can have them. And people just got so furious with me and said that I was a baby killer and that I was just a whore who wanted to have. I mean, it was like very silly, but it was interesting to me because, the method, I didn't have an abortion and I didn't want to have an abortion. And it wasn't a piece about why abortion is good. It's a piece about why you shouldn't have to carry a baby that's going to die anyway, just because some crazy person thinks life begins at conception, And that was, I thought I would be less, it's interesting because of the way I grew up, I thought I would be more personally, I would have a very hard time aborting a fetus, even if it was very sick and going to die. Like, theoretically, I believe life doesn't begin until, I don't know, birth or close to birth or, something like that. I haven't thought about exactly what week, but I don't think it begins at conception. But I still don't think I would have a very easy time aborting a fetus, But I do think we have to have it available for people. And it's interesting because I didn't think the sort of theoretical truth and the real truth are far apart,
Yeah.
For me, so it's interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think those stories are so important. I have a friend who did need to have a second trimester abortion. It was something that wasn't caught until the 20-week ultrasound. And
right.
Similarly, her doctor couldn't perform it. And she had to go to a clinic and she had to, walk the gauntlet outside this clinic with protesters. And, and this was a deeply wanted child, right? She wanted this pregnancy to go to term. She wanted to have this child. I doubt very many people in the second trimester are aborting children that they don't deeply want. And,
right.
It wasn't really until hearing her story that it made me sort of confront things and go, right, of course she should have that choice. And so I think, or not even choice, I mean, really it's something her doctor is telling her she should do.
Right, she has to, yeah.
Yeah, so I I think that hearing those stories and people being open about not just second trimester, but, all of the reasons that they're having abortion, that it's important, and it's never going to reach the trolls who are responding to you with hate mail and not reading the article. But there are people that it does reach, and I think that that's important.
It's interesting that, it's interesting. The abortion stuff I was so interested in because they seem to be so, there are two different things that people get very mad at me about. It's the gun stuff, when you say that they shouldn't have machine guns all the time. I mean, any sort of slight, problem with guns, they don't like that. And then the choice stuff, I mean, these, crazy women on Facebook telling me that I'm a baby killer. It's just interesting. They're very, choice and the guns, they're very worried about. Trade, they don't really care. The sort of issues of kleptocracy in the government, they don't mind. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to these people when Trump goes away, because they've been like put into a cult. And they're so confused, and they rely on him so much that I don't know what they're going to do. We're going to have a large swath of the population that's going to need to be deprogrammed. It's going to be strange,
Yeah. And so how do you react when you become sort of the poster target for these people? Do you react? Do you brush it off at this point? I imagine that for much of your life, you've probably had people saying things about you because you've grown up with more fame. But, how do you respond to those sorts of things? Do you just need to sort of, let it go?
I mean, I don't mind. Because I've been written about so much by my mother, I have this thing of not. It's interesting because someone was saying something mean about me, and my other friend was saying that, I don't know, they were saying something about how just someone was saying something negative about me, and my friend sent it to me. And, the thing is, I don't mind it because I'm so used to it that it doesn't define me, it doesn't speak to me one way or the other. I think it's sort of, I kind of always feel like what my mom always said, which is that if they're talking to you, talking about you, it's actually good, and that it doesn't necessarily matter it doesn't matter what they say. If they're talking, it's good,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, that's just where I grew up, so it just doesn't bother me so much, this negative stuff. I also feel like don't go into this world, writing or politics or whatever, they're all sort of adjacent, without the expectation, the expectation is you're going to get attacked. And I just don't mind it. I always think it's better to be attacked than to be ignored. And I don't know. I also feel like there are people who have it so much worse. And, it's funny because I have this friend who is like very, very, very wealthy. And she was writing about how hard it is with all of her kids and to keep them all managed. And I thought to myself, probably a lot harder if you're not very, 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 very wealthy. I thought, what a fucking lack of perspective. So, I feel like, it's whatever. I'm still not, I'm not walking, 400 miles with no shoes on. Like, I'm just getting a few nasty messages on Facebook. So it doesn't bother me. It's the answer. And I have a lot of perspective for, I'm happy that I'm getting, that I get to write and that people are interested in it. And that I don't care about the other stuff. I don't what other people think of me doesn't define me. Or at least what strangers think of me doesn't define me. Yeah.
Yeah, I find so our Twitter has nowhere near as many followers as yours, but as we've gotten a bigger and bigger Twitter following and, have had occasional posts go viral, and the ones that are just sort of totally nasty, I just, block, ignore. They don't bother me. It's the ones that like don't quite get it. And I just want to keep arguing back and go, no, you don't quite get it. Here's what I really mean. And I really, really realize that, it's probably not worth my time.
It's not. And also the other thing is ultimately it doesn't really matter. I mean, I always feel like I've definitely seen people spend a lot of time like arguing with someone on Twitter. And I'm like, it's possible that's not even a real person. So I don't know that we're winning hearts and minds. And I don't know that we necessarily need to be. There are enough sane people in this country to take the government back from the lunatics, which is what we're hopefully going to do in 2020.
Yes. Yes. And so how do we do that then? I mean, it seems like we made a very good start in 2018, picking up 40 House seats.
It's all going to be like the grassroots stuff of getting people on the ground and looking at. I just talked to someone the other day who's thinking about it. Thinking about a Senate run. There's a lot of seats up in 2020 in the Senate. We need to win back the Senate. I don't know who's going to run against Trump, but that's going to be a whole thing. And, we also just need to have a ground game. Like there are certain states, like with the Mississippi stuff this week, we were talking about how, like what happened in Alabama. I mean, Alabama was unusual, but what happened, Georgia 6 is a better example where, Ossoff didn't win, but he put boots on the ground so that when Lucy ran, she was able to win. Mm-hmm. Because that had not been a district we had been in, or we had been. So I think like a lot of that ground game stuff needs to happen over the next 2 years, and we need to have people staffed up, and we need to have really good candidates. Like I think some of our Senate candidates, it was tricky for us in the Senate, but like we have a lot of, there are just a lot of things we can do to keep it going and to just win back the Senate and the presidency and work on that. So, and I think we can do it. I just think we got to stay focused.
Would you ever run for office?
I mean, I would very much like to, but the thing is where I live is not so, I'm not in a place where it's hugely needed, and I don't live in quite the right, yes, I would like to, but I'm not really in the right district now for what I would want to do. I would really like to run only if it's going to like actually help and not just be for my ego. Mm-hmm. So that's why where I live now is not the right place for that. But it may be eventually that I will live in the right place and these stars will align. And if they do, I will absolutely do it because I would be really interested in doing it. And I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's essentially my answer too. And I always joke about moving back to Ohio where my parents live, where there's all sorts of things to run for.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's great.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, this is fabulous. I'm thrilled to get to talk to you. This was really fun.
All right. Well, thank you, Molly. And
thank you for having me.
Everyone should follow you on Twitter and read your pieces on the forward.
Perfect.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast.